Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, presented by Cattle, Season 5, Episode 20. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our special guest this episode is Nicholas Mulroney, co-founder, chairman, CEO, and president of Bond Bakery Brands. Bond Bakery Brands, founded by three friends, including Nicholas, who saw an opportunity to give back to communities they serve, to invest in authentic family and founder-run companies, and to build upon the successful foundation that has been set by all these great entrepreneurs here in Canada and build it out. We'll hear all that from Nicholas. Sylvain, how did you come across Nicholas?
He actually reached out to me a couple of years ago to visit his plant. I still haven't visited his plant yet. It's actually on my to-do list for this year, but he reached out, and he's a bit of a newbie in the food business because as you will learn talking to Nicholas, he started in finance and got into food kind of by accident, I guess. And now he's doing extremely well, running three plants and looking at the U.S. And really enjoyed our conversation with Nicholas. But, visiting bakeries is something we should all do every single day. It smells so good.
You know what the conversation reminded me of? You remember back at Seattle, we interviewed the guys who took over the pickle company, Putter's Pickles.
Company, yeah.
And they were a couple of investment banking guys and M&A guys, and they wound up running a pickle company. And I think he knew where he was going, but it just reminded me of that story. So anyway, super interesting interview.
What's really interesting with Nicholas is he buys family businesses, right?
Mm-hmm.
So because the food space, for people who aren't aware, there are lots and lots of family businesses, but he's actually going in to save family businesses as a non-family person of these families. So it's a really interesting story.
It's a great alternative to being kind of sucked up by a big conglomerate. And the big conglomerates, basically, they often have a hard time digesting, pun intended, these small family-run businesses. They're just not geared up for
understand their
that.
DNA and all that, but Nicholas, you can tell he's very committed to understanding a
What's made
company's
them
DNA.
special.
Yeah,
Right.
Exactly. Tasting the business, tasting the family.
Yeah.
So he says it makes me laugh.
Yeah, it's funny. For those of you watching this little segment on YouTube, you'll notice I'm going to have a different hat on every episode now. I've decided this hat I'm wearing Interstellar Barbecue, which is a now Michelin-starred barbecue restaurant in Austin, Texas, where I'm off to
Austin, Texas.
on Sunday. I'm going to Austin, and I got a bunch of stuff. I'm going to Barb's in Lockhart, which is about half hour outside Austin. Then I got some other meetings there that I'm going to talk to some great people in the food scene. So I'll bring back some information and hopefully some content. So looking forward to that.
I hope you won't get snow, because it's full of snow right now.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually going down for a Canadian company that's having their offsite, and they always pick a warm place. Oops.
Well, I hope the sauce will be hot. At least there's that.
I can count on the barbecue scene being hot when I'm there, so I can 100% count on that. All right, well, let's get to the news. I mean, we got a super busy show today. There's lots going on. Let's spend a few minutes with what's going on in the U.S. Trump rolled out executive orders, and perspectives or narratives are flowing fast and furious now.
You know what? I look at Trump in the Oval Office as he was actually signing off all these executive orders. He just looked like me grading papers. You know? It's just like he was talking about the WHO, Russia. We need to talk about China. I mean, it was like
freewheeling.
Exactly.
Oh my God! Freewheeling, and I love how he kind of WWE did it in a stadium, and like it made it a performance. Like, this is something we've never seen. It's quite entertaining, notwithstanding all the other stuff in and around it. Now, we've talked about day one, is there going to be this 25%? The threat kind of seemed to moderate there for a bit. Maybe it's going to be executive order to review, to open up CUSMA. Now he's talking February 1st. I feel like you and I can dance around this for hours without a conclusion, because we're just talking about hypotheticals. I feel like we should defer a conversation of any depth.
We're going to talk about hypotheticals for 4 years. You know that, right?
Well, we may run into some actual things, but let's talk about them when they happen, as opposed to, I think there's been enough talking on this show and others about, okay, what if, and will there be 25% on everything? Will it, your perspective still remains. It won't touch food. So, my suggestion is we defer that conversation to when we can have something a little more meaty to talk about. But let's talk about a couple things that came out. I want to start with the flurry of immigration crackdowns. There's a great feature in the Wall Street Journal about the foreign labor in agriculture in America. I was a bit shocked.
Yep.
2/3 are foreign born.
Yep.
42%, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, 42% of meat and farm workers are illegal aliens. 50%
illegal
of foreign workers in the meat packing are illegal. It's probably higher. We talked about that earlier in the year with cleaners. And how do you see the U.S. circling this square of cracking down on illegal foreign workers, but keeping their massive ag machine producing? I mean, do you see shortages, price increases? I've already heard, and wouldn't surprise us, that, when there's a rumor that, the government's coming to investigate who's illegal on the farm, nobody shows up for work, and the crops kind of could rot in the fields. Like, how are you thinking about this? Could this result in higher costs for Canada as we import so much of their product? How are you processing all this?
Well, it's obviously a problem. We're talking about millions and millions of people here. It's not just 10,000 here, 10,000 there. And what I'm hearing from farmer groups in the U.S. right now is that a lot of farmers just don't believe anything will happen. Despite what happened on Monday, they still believe they'll be able to keep their workers. They have the proper papers. They'll be able to keep them on the farm. But obviously, if we are to see all of these people leave the U.S., not only that the U.S. will struggle to feed itself, but these people will have to go somewhere. And so, it is massive. It is going to be a problem if indeed it happens. So I suspect that Mr. Trump will be incredibly careful with how he rolls out this strategy around immigration. But what's really ironic, or there's a bit of a paradox between Canada and the U.S., because in Canada, there's been a lot of complaints about legal immigration. And when you hear America reporting on Canada about the dissatisfaction around Prime Minister Trudeau, for example, a lot of Canadians are uncomfortable with illegal immigrants. With legal immigrants in the U.S., right. They're illegal, as you just mentioned. Yeah. I mean, there's no papers. We don't know where they are. We don't know what's happening. So farmers are really responsible for these people, and I suspect that most of them have been taking good care of them. But it's a problem that's gone out of control, really.
Well, and I'm curious what those numbers would look like in Canada. As you say, it's a very different context. We got America and two oceans in the Arctic between us, and a lot of trouble about people slipping across the border. Now, we did just apparently lose track of 50,000 temporary foreign workers who, that came to Canada to learn Excel or PowerPoint or how to steal cars. Now, we have a different set of issues, but in ag, we know that agriculture, particularly London areas and all the agriculture, there are lots of temporary foreign workers who for many years would come up, and I hear from Jamaica and other places come up and spend the summer here. I guess the issue is qualitatively different.
I visited a farm last summer in Quebec, and there were over 200 foreign workers there, and their family. Right. Their family. They have houses, and some of the managers are foreign workers. They've been going to that same farm for 20 years. They have kids now. I mean, so the regime is very different here compared to the U.S. I would say right now the U.S., they're trying to clean things up, but they can't do it too quickly because it would compromise their food security, and that's a problem. And then, of course, on top of that, they're starting to look at their trading partners and what they import and stuff like that. Right. So there's lots of things happening all at once, which is making agriculture nervous. But again, when you look at trade groups leading the ag sector in the U.S., I see zero concern about what's going on. They actually do believe they'll keep all their workers.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's keep a close eye on it. Now, speaking of automation, one of the things you and I have talked about over the many months and many episodes is this kind of interplay between investing capital and innovation or bringing in cheap labor. Chick-fil-A has got a lemon drink that's much loved. And guess what they just did? When you and I talked about, remember California increased the minimum wage on fast food workers, I predicted, I think you did as well, that would result in more capital investment to make up for that difference. Chick-fil-A has now a lemon squeezing robot that cuts 10,000 labor hours per day out of their business. They centralized the lemon squeezing. They ship it out fresh lemon juice. They saved a bunch of fingers. So, this is this kind of interplay between bringing in labor, bringing in cheaper labor, and investing in capital and innovation to close those gaps, right? I mean, I know you're a big fan of that, right?
Absolutely. It's part of, it was one of my major predictions for 2025. We're going to see more of that. And frankly, who doesn't want a robot at home to cut onions? Like, seriously. And I'm sure restaurants are the same. So you want robots to do all that stuff, that mechanical, repetitive stuff. How do you hire for these positions? It's very tough. And restaurants know, operations know that. And there's lots of debate around tips and how you pay people well. Sure. Well, once you actually bring in automation, you eliminate all these debates, but you still can humanize the experience if in the front of the house, in the dining room, you still have humans serving humans.
In other Trump news, push and pull out of the Paris Climate Agreement. That was one of the first things he did.
That's a big one.
So what, if anything, does the U.S. Leaving the Paris Accord mean to Canada? I mean, our lame duck, soon-to-be U.S. consultant, Liberal Minister Guilbeault, described it as despicable. What does this mean for Canadian climate policy?
He's endorsing
in the
Mr. Carney. Come on.
Carbon
tax Carney.
If I was Mr. Carney, I would ask him to support someone else, actually. But and again, for those gin drinking or vodka drinking, shot taking people, we're not a political podcast.
That's right. Exactly.
Now, what does this mean, if anything, for climate policy? You said a few things on social media about it. Like, if America's going this way, how do we calibrate our response? And I guess, of course, it's in the context of the carbon tax, but how do we calibrate our response or our participation when they're the biggest, they're out of the Paris Accords? And do we know enough to know how to react to this?
It's a big deal. It's a big deal, and frankly, we need to pay attention to that. Whether we agree with it or not, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter really, because we could see a major decoupling of the two economies. Really, on the one side, you would have a country, our country, focusing on taxing pollution, and I think a lot of people actually agree with that. The problem is that it's actually undermining our competitiveness, while on the other side with the U.S., they're going to be focusing on making their economy stronger, more effective, more productive. And I don't see that in Canada. So I've always believed when it comes to climate change that we need to actually have a strong conversation about how to reduce gas emissions while making our sector more competitive. And I've always believed that the carbon tax policy, when it comes to carbon pricing, is limiting. It's actually just punishing. It doesn't really stimulate anything. It's just punishing. And that's why I've always been a bit of a fan of the cap and trade system, because the cap and trade system gives companies options. You basically give markets all the power. If you want to pollute, fine, pay. If you want to be a good environmental steward, fine, make money out of it. Right now, you can't make money out of being a good environmental steward in Canada. And in the US, they're actually reducing their gas emissions without a carbon tax. We can do this, folks.
It's a compelling story. I mean, let's stay tuned, and we'll see what the Poilievre government does with that in April.
I'm concerned about the Conservative because they're still bringing forward this anti-carbon tax agenda without offering any other options, and I'm not sure Canadians are up for that.
Yeah, let's be fair about the political process, because as the opposition, your job is to be the opposition, not to put forward policy. Policy comes later. Like your job is to oppose. Now, the tax.
Well, I mean, he's prime minister in waiting. I mean, at some point, polls are suggesting that he's the prime minister in waiting. Sure. You're going to have to come up with some goods here.
Oh, no? You will, but I disagree that he needs to come up with anything to get elected. He'll do that after. He's already 20 points ahead.
Let's be clear. It's not a political podcast.
It's not a political podcast. All right.
But I do think that at some point he's going to have to be clear around environmental policy, because Canadians are, I think it's important to be clear here. The carbon tax is a problem, and he's recognized that, and more Canadians are recognizing it. But it doesn't mean that Canadians don't care about climate change. I think they all, and I care about climate change, and all companies. I mean, let's face it, all farmers know. I'm meeting with farmers this week. All farmers know that climate change is the number one threat to agriculture. Okay? So how do we actually work with Mother Nature here? That's really the key.
That's a great point. All right, let's talk about Hershey Canada sending cherry blossom to the chocolate graveyard. Are you a fan of cherry blossoms? They're such an iconic little product. Oh, look at that.
No,
You've got
I'm not
a couple.
A fan.
Look at you.
I'm not a fan. I bought a box.
Get it before they go.
I got to tell you, I mean, I was devastated. I mean, most Canadians don't know that this is a Canadian iconic product
Lowry chocolate,
in Sherbrooke, Quebec in 1890.
Wow.
Okay? This candy is 135 years old. Okay. So, but to be honest, when I bought this box from a convenience store and ate one, I think it was 135 years old.
Tasted every year of it. Well, listen, is this a story of a product that's just had its day, and many of them, or is there a deeper meaning here that you're worried about, like a manufacturing? Is this a troubling signal in Canada, or is this just Hershey saying there's not a market for this?
I'll quickly go through the story of cherry blossom. Invented in 1890 in Sherbrooke, so got sold. So Loney, that's the company which invented cherry blossom, got sold to Hershey Canada in 1989, and production was transferred over to Smith Falls, Ontario. But that plant closed in 2012. Yeah, and the production of this candy actually was transferred over to the U.S. So it was Hershey, not Hershey Canada, that actually took it over. And I think over time it just got forgotten. It wasn't really a corporate priority to support the brand. It was a massive brand in the 80s and 70s. You probably remember the commercials.
I do.
But it just left, and people forgot. So this became your grandma or your grandpa's candy. That's basically it. So because the younger generations, they don't know. Actually, as a family, we give these to our kids every New Year's. That was our tradition.
That's fun.
But so they associate this candy with the holidays, and that's it. And so, but it never really transcended beyond that. It never actually went and carried over to another generation at all. Whereas the Cadbury egg is very successful in actually getting out of Easter, let alone other generations. I mean, you remember with the Cadbury egg, it was only available at Easter, but not anymore. You can buy them all year round. So it became very popular, but they also marketed it. But if they stopped doing that, it could actually disappear. So it's the same with this. And so it's unfortunate that it died. But I mean, right now, did you know that there are cases like these being sold for $15,000 on Facebook?
Come on.
I'm not kidding. This is a big deal.
How much you buy that for?
So a reporter called me and she showed me the page, and I said, "That's unbelievable.
That's a prank.
Would you pay $15,000 for these things are sugary? Have you ever had one?
Not in many, many years, because it's just too much sugar for me. And
there's lots of sugar. Yeah, it's done to sugar, but
it's just too much sugar.
But I do think that there is a possibility at some point that Hershey may actually change its mind and perhaps could produce these again, or they may actually sell the brand. But the bottom line is that they're not very good anymore. They changed. It's different. Well, it's not that picture is not accurate. When you actually bite in it, it's hard, it's still hard, and this cherry right there has what we call red dye number 3.
Speaking of which, speaking of cherries, there is my bespoke cherries that I have in my cocktails that my daughter makes for me, and Luxardo for those who are listening, and it is a bespoke $26 a bottle for these cherries, Italian cherries.
Wow,
they last a long time. But
50 cents a cherry.
There is no red dye number 3 in these cherries. All natural.
There you go.
all natural products. So
There
anyway,
you go.
I was very relieved to see that. All right, let's take a break for the news. Let's hear first a few words from our presenting sponsor, Cattle. And then let's get to that great interview with Nicholas talking about bespoke bakeries, what he's learned around the kitchen table, growing up as part of one of Canada's most important modern families. Does your digital customer engagement strategy need a serious upgrade? Enter Cattle, Canada's consumer insights powerhouse with the largest, most active panel of everyday shoppers. They're not your typical sponsor. They're the voice of the consumer, always in the know on the hottest trends and shaping what's next. So why Cattle? They go beyond consumer insights. They're trailblazing the future of ratings and reviews and leading the charge in user-generated content with unmatched syndicated receipt data and the ability to gather reviews across any category. Cattle partners with giants like Walmart, Canadian Tire to deliver results that count. Visit askcattle.com now for an exclusive The Food Professor podcast listener discount on your first review or research campaign today. That's askcattle.com.
We're pleased today to have as a special guest Nicholas Mulroney, CEO of Bon Bakery Brands. Nicholas, welcome to the program.
Sylvain, thank you so much for having me.
Well, I mean, we need to know more about yourself and your professional journey. Can you tell us more about how you end up at Bon Bakery Brands?
It was after coming to the conclusion that I wanted to find a business to buy. So it's a step called entrepreneurship through acquisition. And I found a terrific family-run bakery on Vancouver Island called Portofino Bakery. And that was in 2019. I'll be honest with you, Sylvain, buying a commercial bakery 9 months before a global pandemic
Good
might
time.
not be what the doctor ordered, but for me, it was the challenge that I didn't know I was ready to take on, but it's exactly what formed Bon Bakery Brands. So we own the bakery, and then our
Well, I'll be honest with you, Nicholas. You are from a famous family, and I didn't know that one of the Mulroneys was actually in the food business, and so when I saw your name, I was, wow, this is great.
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where yes, I do come from a famous family, but my brother Ben. He's been doing pro bono work on the food side for years. He's been doing R&D on his own. So
with whom I speak to on a regular basis on his program, by the way.
Yeah, you can, if you wanted to offline talk about food, he'll talk your ear off. Just make sure you don't get a hot dog as a sandwich, because then he just goes off on tangents.
Nicholas, I got a question for you. So were you always looking at your LinkedIn? Looks like you've always been into finance. Was that something that struck you right away as a young fella? I mean, you've got politics, you got media, you've got all kinds of things to learn around the kitchen table. Was finance always in your front of your mind?
Well, politics was always around the kitchen table, and what I ended up seeing was how influential many of the decisions in Ottawa, many of the decisions in Washington can impact everybody. So I grew up with a father who was a lawyer. My sister went to law school after she was briefly an investment banker, but went to law school at NYU. My brother Ben went to law school at Laval in Quebec City. So growing up, it was really law was the first channel. I took a pre-law class at Boston College, and it was at that moment where I realized I'm not going to go into law. That wasn't for me.
How did you break that news? How did that go over? It's like what did you say? What did you just say? You're not going into law?
Yeah, no, that one was easier. That news was a little easier to break than when I told my parents I was going to go do M&A for a cemetery and funeral home company. That one was a bit more, I had to be a bit more delicate with that news. Yeah, but when it came to not being a lawyer, it's one of those things where you have to have a very specific skill set. And for me, I was not blessed with it, especially looking at my sister and how incredible she is and diligent at reading and studying and all of that. And so for me, I ended up liking finance. And so I got a summer internship at a bank in Toronto, and that's really what catapulted my career. So yes, I spent quite a bit of time on the finance side. That was the channel I went up. I saw some great businesses in Canada and how they were built. And I wanted to go ahead. I thought I'd have an original idea. I didn't, but then I found that great bakery on Vancouver Island.
How did Bond Bakery brands come into your life, essentially?
So with every conflict or crisis, there's an opportunity that some people can capitalize on. And in my case, the global pandemic was that opportunity. So on Vancouver Island, as you can imagine, it's a net importer of a lot of goods. Not a lot of goods are manufactured.
And where was it on Vancouver Island specifically?
Specifically just north of Victoria.
Okay.
Yep. So you land at the airport and you're not far away from our factory.
Okay.
But what ended up happening was the ferries were closed down. Our community needed us. And so what we had was pallets of bread. We dropped off to local shelters, community groups making sandwiches. And it was at that moment where I go, oh my gosh, we've got a really powerful vehicle here to enact some change and to be great corporate citizens. And so it was really that moment that was the genesis. And we went down the road with Portofino Bakery to make it one of the very few commercial bakeries that are B Corp certified. So on our bread, you'll see the B Circle logo, and that was very hard earned and well earned, and a symbol for us to showcase that we're building better bakeries at Bond Bakery Brands. And so once the pandemic hit, yeah, it was a terrible moment, but it also provided an opportunity for us to say, okay, let's go do this on a bigger scale. And that's what Bond Bakery Brands was. It's now a platform to go make investments in family and founder run bakeries. And we now have 3.
Oh, okay. So where are the 3 right now?
In 2020, in the fall, we ended up buying a commercial bakery and processor called Pace Processing. It's in Surrey, so not far from Vancouver, and specializes in pizzas, specializes in desserts, and specializes in cookies. And so you've likely had a Pace product and not known about it. And that's what I've really liked about that company. They're experts at talking to their customers and finding out how they can make what private label needs that a grocery retailer or convenience store has, how they can take those needs and turn them into a fantastic product. So Pace is an exceptional, I call them a bakery solutions company. You've got a problem and they'll solve it. And then in 2021, we bought our first bakery in Ontario, so not far away from where I live, called Coco Bakery. It's North America's largest manufacturer of French macarons. And as well, we make a lot of cake pops. So sweet momentary desserts.
Excellent. So how do you pick your bakeries, I guess? Do you have any criteria do you adhere to? Tell us more about the process. How you select partners as you grow your network?
Absolutely. So I think it's a really interesting one because as you know, Sylvain, food, you can actually taste your investment. So it's very rare that an opportunity comes, across your desk and a broker or a banker doesn't say that it's an industry leader. And you can actually tell if it's an industry leader by tasting it. So first you taste the product and realize if you've got something you can work with. And in the case of all of my bakeries, that was certainly the first gate. But the second gate is it a family and founder run bakery? We think it's really important. These families, these founders have built up tremendous businesses over the long term. And the reason for the sale, there are a multitude of reasons, many that can present itself, but really they're looking for the next stewards of their business to grow them. And that's exactly where we come in. We've learned a lot since buying a bakery before that pandemic. We've been doing it for nearly 6 years. And supply chain issues, highways getting flooded out west, border closures. We've learned a lot over the last handful of years. But what we all specialize in is growing these family founder run businesses. And that's what motivates us every single day.
Before I throw it back to Michael, are you looking beyond Canada or are you sticking to Canada?
Right now we're in Canada, but we would love to one day have more bakeries north of the borders and more bakeries south of the border. That's really the plan. We're building this for the long term. We think it's a really cool vehicle. And we have a lot of interest from family and founders that are curious to know what we're up to. And so, yeah, we take a really long-term approach, and I'd love to have a diversified portfolio that, people and consumers, when they see the Bond butterfly, that they know that's a good business, and we can trust these people.
It's a really interesting business model because you've been an operator and now you're an investor. So you have those two lenses. When you look at an investment, and I love the fact that you can actually taste the quality, so you kind of get a leading indicator. Is there a mix of, we think this is going to fit good in our portfolio, what we have, you and your partners have as skills and opportunity? And do you bring those, how do you start to say, okay, we can help you modernize and we can bring you resources that you may not have had access to? Or is it a blend of those two things? Like, do you see both the potential and the existing opportunity in your business model?
Certainly. I think before getting into any investment of any sort, you want to make sure that you have a thesis that you can, and if it is to grow it, that it actually makes sense. And for us internally, we always talk about playing the hand that's dealt to us. And so many of these bakeries have different strengths. Portofino has an exceptional product. Pace Processing has an exceptional team that can take whatever, like I said, a bakery solution. And then Coco Bakery has quite a bit of strengths. And so really it's about finding out what are the levers that you can pull most effectively. We don't have unlimited pools of capital. We can't do everything at the same time. And these are private Canadian companies, so I don't think that they would be able to do so many things at once. And so it's about growing at the right pace and developing the right investment strategy for the specific investment. So playing the hand that's dealt to us. But at Bond Bakery Brands, what we have is we have a united business development team at head office. So when we speak to a client of ours, either on the grocery retail side, perhaps on the gas and convenience side, it's a unified team that can support across Canada and into the US. And so I think that that's our competitive advantage as we look to scale and add more businesses to our portfolio. We'll be able to have more in-depth conversations with some great partners. And I think that for us, having a unified head office and handling every subsidiary or operating company individually, I think it's a great recipe for us.
Yeah, no kidding. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about innovation versus growth versus how you balance those two things. So as I'm listening to you and reflecting on your philosophy and your thesis as you described it, where does and how does innovation come to play? You mentioned earlier on that listen to the customer, in that case, probably a commercial customer. But when you sit down with your portfolio of companies and say to yourselves, what's next? How do we take advantage of the next opportunity? And at the same time, how do we scale and be profitable? What's your process for that? Because, if I put it in the frame of table stakes versus differentiators, the water level, so to speak, for table stakes keeps going up. You mentioned becoming a B Corp as a differentiator, but talk about your innovation process a little bit.
I think it really starts with the customer. It starts with being able to have a two-way conversation with the customer and seeing what needs they might want from, that they might want to test out, they might want to try out in their retail stores. And so I think that has been such a great starting point for our innovation teams. We've taken risks on some products and they haven't worked out very well. When we bought Coco Bakery, we thought there was a great product and we thought it was going to be the next thing for several years. And then as soon as we purchased it, nobody wanted the product. And so we just
dynamic environment, to be fair. It's a very dynamic environment at the same time, right? Like it's not static where you can take a couple of years to get a product right. You got to move pretty quick, I'd expect. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And I think our teams excel at being nimble. We're not one of the big guys. We compete against the big guys, but what separates us is our ability to have a conversation with our customer and being able to commercialize a product within weeks and provide them a solution much quicker than our competitors. And so that will always be our competitive advantage. I love being in that medium size and being able to attack great opportunities. But innovation for us, that's what's going to continue to drive our growth for our company. I'll use the example that we had at Coco Bakery. When we purchased the bakery in 2021, it made macarons and it didn't make one single cake pop. And we're now the second largest manufacturer of cake pops in North America. And that's coming right outside of Toronto, Ontario. And it's a really cool story. So that's really what showcases how we can innovate and how quickly we can innovate and how quickly we can scale up once we innovate. And that's what our competitive advantage will remain for us.
I'm actually on your website right now looking at cake pops, very colorful, birthday cake chocolate, Christmas mint, Valentine's strawberry with Valentine's coming up. Really, they seem like great products. I've never tried one, but they seem really spectacular. So good influence there with Coco. Since we're on this topic, let's talk about the consumer. So you've made some adaptation with Coco. So how do you see the consumer over the next several years? What are people looking for? We know that inflation is a big factor. Prices are a big factor. But beyond that noise, what do you see on your radar right now when it comes to the consumer?
There are several factors that we look at when we think about our consumer, and Sylvain, you saw our website, and we have for different companies, we have different target consumers. I think that we will always continue to be competitive on price, offering value for price, and that's really what our customer looks for on the branded side. On the private label side, we have to be strong on price as well. I think that it starts with that, and you can't play the game without being competitive on price. So we'll park price for a second. The consumer wants value for their dollars. I think that the lot on both sides of the border, because that's where we sell in both Canada and the US. You want something good, and you want something that might be worth purchasing. Mm-hmm. And so value for dollars is always going to be front and center. And so we look at a lot of data. We look at some new products. I can tie that into innovation as well. But yeah, I think that in the end, I don't know where trends will go for the consumer. We obviously, and Sylvain, you've highlighted them many times. Consumers now don't go for one grocery shop a week. They'll go to a big box store. They'll go to a dollar mm-hmm. store. They'll go around and try and find the best deals possible. So when it comes to moments like a cake pop, when it comes to that and they want to reward themselves or reward their kids, they'll take that momentary, make that momentary purchase and purchase something worthwhile. And we want fun moments like that to mm-hmm. be available to them.
So I'll just ask one question about innovation, and you've been talking about innovation for a bit with Michael. The cycle from idea to execution and commercialization. How long is your cycle at Bond? And so, is it 6 months, a year, 3 months? What is it?
We can go as fast or as slow as a customer wants. Again, we are focused exclusively. Wow. We are focused exclusively on a customer. So if a customer wants to run a long, detailed process where they want to go out to several parties and get pricing and different samples, we can do that. If a customer calls us up and says they'd like a sample for next week with specific ingredients, we can do that. We are hyper focused on our customer, and again, it goes back to that two-way conversation with them. It's great because we're a trusted partner for many, and we want to be a trusted partner. We want to continue to be a trusted partner. So mm-hmm. on that cycle, if you wanted pizza samples, we could ship some out to you next week, Sylvain.
Wow.
So Nicholas, I wanted to spend the last question on you and your executive team and how you are planning for 2025 and beyond in what can only be described as a very dynamic environment. And the consumer is fairly dynamic, but there's a general theme, right? They're value seeking. but the external environment, let's say, is going to be very dynamic. So, we're asking all our guests, kind of trying to get inside their heads a little bit about, are you doing scenario planning? Are you doing multifaceted what ifs? Like, how are you approaching planning for the year and the years ahead in where we are in terms of a dynamic environment?
Yeah, Michael, it's a terrific question, and we're having this conversation after the inauguration of the 47th President of the United States, where a lot of people thought we would be going through a specific gate on tariffs. And I think that how I'm handling the current situation actually goes against many of the things that I pride myself on is a high level of preparation and going through several scenarios. The decision tree that needs to go through. Are we getting a tariff over here? What's going on over here? Especially with so much of my growth of my business coming south of the border. Yeah. I'll be very honest with you. I'm being very patient at the moment. I'm not making any long-term decisions on social media posts, Wall Street Journal articles, whatever it might be. We are long-term committed partners to some large retailers in both Canada and the US. And while we are nimble, we are competing against some of the largest players in our industry. And I want to show my commitment to our customers by taking long-term approaches. So if a tariff is enacted on my business tomorrow, we're gonna hit the pause button and evaluate everything. Right. The first lever we will not do is raise prices. I think that it especially with the customers that we're dealing with, the conversations, those two-way conversations that I mentioned, we want to be focused on doing right by them and having a long-term partnership. So we've seen tariffs threatened. We've seen tariffs previously put on certain businesses and then taken off. So for us, I'm prepared for many scenarios. I'm just going to wait for the first one to present, and I'm going to tackle one at a time.
Right on. Right on. What a great approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you feel that the currency is going to help you? Is going to make sure that you remain competitive in the market in the US?
It does. Yes, but Sylvain, I see it more as an offset.
It's a bit of a hedge, eh? It's like if the country struggles a bit economically, then the lower dollar becomes a bit of a hedge in selling into the U.S. Right? These things, there's some puts and takes there, right?
I think that from my standpoint, when you're playing such a competitive game, high stakes game, such as the one we're playing. It's very important to know what the rules are of the game. And so I'm just waiting to figure out what
if you know what the rules are, let me know.
Yeah, let us know, man. We'll get you back on.
I'm trying to figure out what the game's shaping up to be. So that's why I would have telling my team, all right, here's what we're going to do in this scenario, in this scenario, in this scenario. But in this case, I'm going to be patient and just wait. Because there's a lot of news, and even looking at the currency in the last 24 hours,
bouncing all over.
It's lost $1, it's gained $1, it's lost $1. It's been really interesting to watch.
We're on TikTok. We're off TikTok. We're on TikTok. We're off TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I guess that's the world we live in. Large things can change and then change back.
Thanks so much for taking the time to share what you're thinking, and congratulations on all your success. We wish you, Sylvain and I wish you much continued success. Now, if folks want to find out more about your business and get in touch, how do they do that?
You can go to bondbakerybrands.com. And please, if you go to many grocery stores across Canada, you'll see Portofino Bakery. It's some of the best bread you can get in a grocery store, and there's amazing people working behind the scenes to ensure that we deliver it to a lot of Canadians. And so there's a lot of pride. I'm very proud of it, so much so that I staked my career on purchasing it and growing it. Yeah. So thank you guys very much for the opportunity to tell my story and to showcase my businesses.
Well, listen, as I said, thanks for joining us on the Food Professor podcast, and much continued success and safe travels, and have a great rest of your day.
Absolutely. Big fan of the podcast. Keep up the great work.
Thanks, Nicholas, and best of luck to you.
Thank you very much.
We're back. Let's talk about these blockbuster CPI inflation numbers. So the lowest numbers we've seen last quarter in a long, long time in terms of inflation numbers, but there is a caveat that you point out to those numbers.
Oh my God. So I went through some data over the last 25 years. Do you know which month where we often see a huge jump in food inflation? Historically, over the last 25 years, okay, the number one month is November. Okay.
Okay.
After that, it's December. So typically in December, and these are blackout months, by the way, hint. And number 3 is which month? February. After the blackout. I wonder why. So just for folks listening in and don't know about the blackout, typically grocers ask suppliers not to raise prices from November 1st to February 1st. And often what I hear from people, oh, that's great. Prices are frozen for 3 months. No, not really. It's just up the food chain. It's up the food chain collusion, sort of. So you're seeing more price volatility affecting negatively consumers in November and December. Yesterday, December numbers come out, and I'm expecting, bit of a jump, minus 2.2 from 2.8% to 0.6%. That's a drop of 2.2%, which is the highest drop in history. So
now,
we're going back.
What in your mind accounts for that?
So when you start digging into the numbers, you quickly realize that it's in service that things really went south, minus 4.5% in food service. And what happened on December 14th of this year?
GST holiday. Yeah.
That's it. So when you look at provinces, that's when you see a strong correlation between that drop in food inflation rates in service versus the actual percentage drop. So let's say, for example, all the maritime provinces, they're at minus 15%, all of them, okay? That's where we've seen the highest drop, essentially, at anywhere between 3 to 4%. Ontario was actually next, and Ontario was a minus 13%. And so with the HST, so you can see that really the HST holiday really impacted inflation because when you actually read the Statistics Canada's methodology, it includes taxes. So it will read the actual money you pay for your food. Same for retail as well. Okay, but in retail, it's really not a big of a factor because a lot of things aren't taxed at all. So here's the thing about yesterday, and I think it's a bit dangerous to assume that food prices are cheaper. So what Statistics Canada have said basically yesterday is that people are spending less on food. They did spend less on food because month to month, from November to December, it's minus 1.8% and minus 3.5%. So prices actually did drop, okay? But because they include taxes, it doesn't mean that food is cheaper. That's the thing. And so I'm expecting the same thing for January, the same thing for February, but watch out for March, or watch out for February numbers in March.
So by your hypothesis, the very much opposite should happen in March when they report February numbers, right? Boom, goes the dynamite because
exactly, and that's why LeBlanc came out with a report yesterday on inflation. I think they are actually seeing the writing on the wall. People are going to jump in February. But this is I have another concern, and I've been very clear about this, and I was clear about this at Senate. I was clear about this on the show. Opportunity pricing. When you look at food inflation rate reduction versus the reduction in taxes, the correlation is strong between provinces, but you can tell that the amounts aren't matching at all. You should have seen a greater difference. So my guess is that there's a lot of opportunity pricing. What I mean by that is that operators are probably taking advantage of that tax void that's left out by the GST holiday to just increase prices subtly here and there to increase margins. And who would blame them? If the market is there, why not? People aren't noticing because they're saving money. They're still saving money, but they're saving money on taxes on an amount that is probably larger now. And it's going to get larger by the time we get to St. Valentine's Day.
Very interesting.
And disturbing at the same time, because really, this has been my number one concern about the GST audit because of its temporary
You said
nature.
that right off the top. Yeah,
it distorts data. It distorts inflation data. And you saw that yesterday. Duclos, Guilbeault, even Freeland basically were tapping themselves on the back saying,
we're winning.
We took care of inflation.
Yeah. We're winning. Yeah. Well, let's move on to an interesting story. We've got another couple of salmonella outbreaks. One relatively minor one in eggs, which is kind of rare, actually. I
think that one is a little bit more important, to be honest. And I'll explain to you why.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's talk first about there's the outbreak in these Italian mini pastries, and what caught sickened about 61 Canadians. What caught 61. My attention. Big, right? What caught, and, of course, unfortunately, catered events and retirement home folks get it all the time. The least people who can absorb it. But it was interesting. They said they're going to send inspectors over to Italy potentially. Is that common? I'd never heard of such a thing that they
it's actually becoming more common. You see with food safety, before many years ago, I would say 20, 25 years ago, it was all about domestic risks. Managing domestic risk. But now a lot of agencies are trying to get to the source. They're trying to manage. So we import a lot of food from abroad. Same with the US. So they will have people from the FDA, people from the USDA. We have people from the CPI abroad testing, verifying at the source. Absolutely. And companies tend to be quite accommodating. And frankly, they prefer that because instead of shipping a bunch of loads of their product only to be rejected on site, they'd rather actually have the CFI go over, approve things, making sure that things are okay. So there's actually more and more of that happening. So yeah, frankly, I wasn't surprised when I learned that. And I suspect it's going to happen more and more. But so yeah, the pastry one was unfortunate. It's very rare that you see 61 cases before a recall is done.
Big, right? It's big,
yeah, it's
right?
big. It's big. Yeah. But it's a B2B recall. So these pastries you and I can't buy. It's institutional. You would eat them in seniors' homes, in restaurants, hotels,
hospitals,
things like that.
Hospitals.
The egg one was
let's talk about that one.
I think Burnbury, for example, is a great organization because it really it was preemptive. This recall was preemptive, but it was consumer fronting. People buy eggs.
On our dinner table last night, we checked our egg package and it was affected. We had a package of eggs that fell into we're gonna bring it back or throw it out or whatever.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so it was the responsible. There was no cases, no illnesses reported, and they recalled. And I think they've destroyed over 500,000 eggs now. And so that's a lot of money. And so, but they did it because I suspect they saw a flaw on their line. They saw a mechanical flaw, and they just said, you know what, let's not take a chance. So it was a really good call. So people shouldn't be concerned about eggs at all when buying them in Canada.
Now, you mentioned Burnbrae. I think there's other producers, or is this all Burnbrae issue? I thought it was a different issue.
Well, their name wasn't mentioned, but when you look at the market affected, it has to be Burnbrae. Because they mention brands, but they don't mention the company.
Right.
So,
and then I saw that on their social media that they put out something about this issue. Yeah. So,
but it was actually, I thought it was actually well managed compared to the Silk one or other recalls we've seen. I mean, that was a study in how
that was a study. Do everything opposite, and you're
I know
closer to where you should be.
And now they're bankrupt.
Call her a beverage entrepreneur. Call her daddy. Podcasting superstar Alex Cooper launching an electrolyte beverage with Nestle Unwell. We've seen other podcasts, YouTube celebs, Prime Hydration from YouTubers Logan Paul, KSI. That's worth like $1.2 billion, by the way, now, which is just crazy. So have you ever heard of Call Her Daddy or Alex Cooper, Sylvain?
To be honest, nope.
You might have heard of her because she was one of the podcasts that Kamala Harris went on. Her podcast started, she's just a phenomenal story. She started a podcast, and it was basically her and a partner talking about saucy stuff about dating in the New York scene. But behind that all, she had a family that was in media. She's a D1 soccer athlete in the U.S., and she has created an empire podcasting talk show. And this is just her next thing, Unwell. Very fun brand. It's on sale now. Target in the U.S. probably would come to Canada. And it's all about recovery from being out and leading a fast-paced life. Here's my question to you. We've seen all these kind of celebs. Now we're seeing podcasters. What product should we launch as the Food Professor podcast? Food Professor Poutine. There you go. The Food Prof Poutine. There you go. In a liquid form.
I mean, if I were to, invent, come up with a product that I would actually want to enjoy with you, for example, I'd go with a beer.
Yeah.
And
maybe some coffee. Maybe coffee.
Yeah, probably some coffee. Yeah, no, there's tons of. I haven't thought of that one, to be honest. But
well, if you don't know Alex Cooper's story, I find it quite inspiring. She's just building an alternative, so to speak, media empire as a podcaster. Started basically with just one show, and now she's millions, has an audience of millions, knows her market. So we wish her all the best with Unwell. I'm going to grab someone. I'm in the States next week and give it a try, and I will report back. Congrats also to our Cial Innovation winners and prior guests on the pod, Tofu Crusaders.
Tofu, yeah, absolutely.
Jennifer Zimmerman, Amy Bronstein, Epic Tofu founders. Their business was acquired by Dansu Foods, another Quebec company. Congratulations on that liquidity moment. I know they worked super hard for that. Congratulations. Yep. And big news coming out of Walmart Canada. So congratulations to Vanessa Yates coming in as the new CEO out of the Walmart organization. Gonzalo Gerba is stepping down. He's not staying in the organization. He's going back to Argentina. He's sick of our weather, no doubt. I like Gonzalo. I was on the stage with him. I did a panel with him, and I found him
straightforward.
I found him a generous and very savvy leader, and I think I'll miss having him around. But welcome to Vanessa. I've reached out to the folks at Walmart if they're listening and asked if we could get her on the pod.
That would be nice.
Help introduce her to the industry. She's a Walmart veteran, also from done some stuff in Europe. She looks after their loyalty program with some bazillion numbers of people. So now she's taken on an operating role. So congratulations. We'll look forward for that. All right, that's the show. Lots of stuff going on, and we'll always be here for you. Lots more interviews, great interviews coming up. I'm Michael LeBlanc, media entrepreneur, keynote speaker. And you are?
I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Safe travels, everyone.
Take care.